Okay, well, I guess that's my cue. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on this 2-hour course on Risk Rating 2.0 specifically. My name is Gilbert Guidon. I'm the Regional Flood Insurance Liaison at FEMA Region 6. I have been preaching this message on Risk Rating 2.0 for the past 2.5, 3 years, and we are finally here. Today, I have Rebecca Digg with me. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi guys, I'm Rebecca. I work with our floodplain administrators on training, but also getting training to real estate professionals, insurance agents, and our partners like Louisiana REALTORs. So thank you for having us on.
So
Also
Rebecca,
sorry, Gilbert, we do have Teresa Schaubecker on with us as well on our team.
great. With that being said, as we move forward, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Rebecca and Teresa are going to try to capture the questions so we can answer them towards the end. This is a 2-hour course. Now, I do want to try to stop and answer a lot of questions during the course. That way it's not forgotten at the end, but we do have to be mindful of everyone's time. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. A couple of things I'm going to talk about is the NFIP today. We're going to talk about what is and what is not changing. We're going to talk about the transition of current policies now that we are in both phases of Risk Rating 2.0. I'm going to leave with some resources, and we will have questions and answers at the end if time allows. Before we start on Risk Rating 2.0, let me give you a little bit of history where we stand. Right now, we have about 5 million policies in FEMA's book of business. Now, there's no way we can write 5 million policies on our own. So we work with what is called WYO, Write Your Owns. Now, these are major companies who offer flood insurance across the nation. Well, they have a contract with us that they will process flood insurance policies as well as claims on behalf of FEMA. We have $1.3 trillion total coverage, and right now we have about 22,525 communities who participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. Now, it's important we put that out there because flood insurance through the NFIP is only available to communities who are participating members of the National Flood Insurance Program, which we do have a handful in Region 6 that are still non-participating. I want to start with some numbers for you. We're going to go into more information on why we are doing what we're doing with the Risk Rating 2.0. But I want to bring your attention to preferred risk policies. We got about 49.6 of a National Flood Insurance Program's book of business are single-family homes under the PRP. That is a lot of flood insurance policies that were rated under the PRP. Well, under Risk Rating 2.0, and we will get into more depth on this, PRPs are going away. And I have been asked multiple times why BRPs are one of the most popular products. Well, it's because preferred risk policies are not based off of risk. They're based off a location on a map. There is no information in regards to a PRP. You were in an area of minimal flooding, therefore you got this rate. It was as simple as that. Well, we have learned over the years that areas of minimal flooding are still experiencing an increase in flooding events. 33% of our claims have been paid in areas of minimal flooding. So therefore, with Risk Rating 2.0, we now have the capability to identify the individual risk characteristic of every building in our book of business. Preferred risk policies will now be based off their true risk rate instead of just the location on the map. With that being said, I want you to take a look at what the average premium was for a PRP, about $498. That is very, very reasonable. Now, on average, I have seen that this was nationwide, but in Region 6, a lot of our PRP policies average closer to $700. But still very reasonable for a yearly flood insurance premium. Now, and do anticipate an increase in some of these areas that are in some of our areas of the region that are close to flooding sources along the Gulf Coast, Great Lakes, or the Pontchartrain Lake, which is constituted Great Lake for us, and other riverine and fluvial low-lying areas. Now, let's take a look at the center gray box at the bottom, the grandfather properties. Now, there's a lot of misconception out there that we have millions upon millions of policies in our book of business that are under grandfathering. In reality, we got about 165,000. So just under 5% of our entire book of business are grandfather policies. And that's very easy to explain because over time, the grandfather policies have experienced rate increases like everyone else. And those rate increases have finally got to the point where it's most advantageous for the insured to transition to a standard flood insurance policies, which is based off of known variables, than grandfathered policies, which is based off unknown assumptions. So eventually grandfathering policies will increase to where they're no longer the best option. And then we have been whittling away at them for years. So That explains why we have so few. Now, grandfathering is going away, but the rate in which they are starting, and the rate at which they are currently is going to be the starting point for their incremental increase or their glide path moving forward on a risk rating 2.0. So still a very good policy to have. Now, let's take a look at pre-firm and newly mapped. Now, everything that we're going to talk about today is happening under FEMA's scope of authority for the National Flood Insurance Program. In 1968, Congress passed the National Flood Act, which was first administered by HUD and then transitioned over to FEMA when it was created. Now, the National Flood Insurance Act requires that FEMA has a sound financial flood plan program, and also over the time has implemented some statutory requirements. Some of those statutory requirements are the pre-firm subsidies and also newly mapped properties. While these discounts are going to be reviewed annually and they may not be the same yearly, they will be processed every year by FEMA. And those discounts, if applicable to the individual's insured structure, they will be applied. Now let's take a look at the high-risk coastal zones. As you can see, nationwide, very few of them, about 12,289. And that is, rightfully so. I would expect higher numbers in our coastal areas because the water, living next to water has always been a desirable. Back in the founding of our country, it was because of transportation. But over the years, recreational water activities, fishing, sporting events, all those are just desirable locations nowadays. But they are some of the most restrictive zones to live in and at higher risk. So therefore, their flood insurance premiums are higher. As you can see, the average flood insurance premium in our coastal zones was about $5,400. Now, these were based off of the old rating methodology. Risk rating 2.0 has changed a lot of this. Now, let's talk about full risk properties. So a lot of the things that are happening under the old system were based off of unknown assumptions, such as pre-firm, elevation certificates, post-construction material was not required because it was eligible for the pre-firm. So we just went off assumptions. And we didn't have the information we needed to make real decisions. Well, full risk properties are opposite of that. They're often post-construction development, and we have elevation certificate, we have BFEs, we have information to go off the full risk properties. So those are going to have a better avenue moving forward under risk rating 2.0 because they're already at their risk. Well, risk rating 2.0 started off and has taken momentum. A lot of people leave off a key aspect of that. Risk rating 2.0 is actually risk rating 2.0 equity in action. And what we are trying to do is we're trying to fix an inequity that we created under the legacy system on accident. So you will have a $2 million valued home right next to a $200,000 valued home. Okay, now all the characteristics that used to be used to derive the flood insurance premium being the same, that means the flood zone is the same, the elevation is the same, lowest floor elevation is the same, their flood insurance premium would have been the same. Even though the one valued at $2 million is going to vastly exceed the damage in a flooding event than the $200,000 home. And it's the partial claims that are really eating our lunch in FIP. That $2 million home won't be declared completely destroyed, but 1 inch of water can cost up to $26,000 for a standard size single family home. So when you have higher footprint homes, those partial claims are going to easily approach the $250,000 amount. So risk rating 2.0 is addressing that by taking replacement cost value as a direct variable. So what this means is lower valued, especially lower valued pre-firm homes will have a lower flood insurance premium compared to their counterparts who have higher valued homes. We are trying to fix the inequity that we accidentally put into place under the legacy methodology, rating methodology. So in 1968, Congress passed the National Flood Act to be a self-sustaining program. In other words, we collect the premiums in, and then when we have claims, we use the premiums collected to pay those claims. And everything worked pretty well up until 2005. Well, pretty sure that you know what happened in 2005 with Hurricanes Katrina, Wilma, and Rita. Well, that year we paid out $17.5 billion. And we have seen an increase, and not just an increase, but also an increase in the amount of events, but also the severity of these events have been taking place. In fact, for the past 6 years alone, we have paid out $1.2 billion a year in flood insurance claims. The old system as it stood was not sustainable. We simply could not do that anymore. So we are transitioning to risk rating 2.0, which is going to fix several issues. And one of those issues was the rating cliff. Now, so this diagram you have in front of you, you have a house that is outside of the special flood hazard area. And as you can see, you have the red dashed line in the zone identified as AE. Now, if there was a home that was identical to the one on the visual aid inside of that special flood hazard area, that rate would be significantly higher than the one you see on the screen. But we are relying the water to stop on that dotted line before it hits the house out there. And we are realizing that's not the case. Water is going to follow the path of least resistance. And we have seen it heading towards these areas of minimal flooding. But the area of minimal flooding will still have a significantly lower flood insurance premium than those inside of the special flood hazard area. Those are our rating cliffs. Even though we know water is not going to stop on that imaginary line on a map, we still rate them as if it would. And that simply has to change. Now, risk rating 2.0 is adding on several different rating variables. But let's talk about the variables in the old system first. Well, the flood insurance rate map was used, right? We determined your zone, the base flood elevation, and the foundation type, which identified, the method in which the home was built, and structural elevation for the special flood hazard areas. But what a lot of people don't realize is that you were also rated off of one of two flood perils. That was flooding from riverine or flooding from coastal storm surge. But you're only rated at the one of the greatest risks. But in reality, a single structure can face multiple flood perils. And we have changed to reflect this under risk rating 2.0. So as you can see, there were just a couple of variables under the Lake methodology. However, when we take a look at the same variables used for risk rating 2.0, we see an increase in the rating variables. Those are going to be distance to flooding sources. Now, we mean distance to flooding sources, we're talking about 1,000 yards. And for flooding source, we mean something substantial, a lake, a river, an ocean, the coast. Now, I do have a question in pending over the headquarters is what does a bayou constitute? I know it's a big question in Louisiana because there are some bayous that are really small and there's some bayous that are really large. I'm still waiting for a response on that. And once I get that question answered, in writing, I'll make sure that is disseminated to all the associations so they can clarify this. But right now we're focusing on major flooding sources. So rivers, lakes, oceans. Now building occupancy has always been a big thing under the NFIP and it will remain so. 2015, Congress passed the Homeowners Flood Insurance Affordability Act. It requires flood insurance rates be increased no more than 5%, but no more than 18%, okay? Well, that's where we get the 18% increase from under risk rating 2.0. And you're going to hear more about that moving forward. But we are referring to your primary residence. So if you have a home that is not your primary residence, you can expect the increase to be a little bit higher in nature. Now, construction type, we are finally going to take in construction type and construction method into consideration. This is already being done in private sector, but something we haven't captured before. We have simply learned that there are construction types and methods out there that are more resilient to flooding than what is commonly used. I mean, let's be honest, commonly slab on grade foundation use wood frame or metal frame with brick veneer. And it just involves significant damage to the structures when flooding does happen. Now, we have a series of 80 different diagrams for the foundation types. It's very confusing. Well, we are trying to remove the complexity of what was risk rating 2.0. And due to that, we have transitioned to 6 foundation types. Now, I know there are many different types of foundations out there, but all of them will be whittled down to one of the 6. Ground and surrounding elevation. This is a big thing. Although the legacy system, we took in consideration the base soil elevation, right? We didn't take a good look at the elevation of where the house is sitting and then the surrounding elevation. Under risk rating 2.0, we are. This is going to capture houses that may be built on higher elevations, such as the top of hills. But unfortunately, it's also going to capture low-lying areas that may be more susceptible to fluvial flooding risk, which is rainfall events. The first floor height. You know, we used to ask for flood insurance, what is the lowest floor compared to the BFE? And then what is the freeboard for the community, higher standards? It was complex. Now we're just going to ask, the first floor height. And all this is how high is your first floor from the ground, in particular, the lowest base grade. In fact, we are now going to provide a majority of that information for our insured. Now, the number of floors used to be kind of complex. It would be a weird formula for our residential condominium association people, but now it's going to be simple. 1 is 1, 2 is 2. For single family homes, 3+. It's going to be 3+. For commercial type buildings, 100 floors is going to equal 100 floors. Very simple. Now, prior claims have always been a direct variable in how flood insurance is written. Under risk rating 2.0, our actuaries determined that bringing over all prior claims at one time would be difficult. So what we decided to do is to start everyone with a clean slate on previous claims. Now, this does not mean they're being erased or deleted. It just means the prior claim history is being held in limbo until the first claim under risk rating 2.0 is filed. Once that is submitted, then all prior claims will come back as a direct variable for flood insurance under risk rating 2.0. So as you can see, big difference in the number of variables. Now we're going to try to break this down a little bit here moving forward. So with that, let's talk about the data sources. Well, FEMA is incorporating many different data sources, not just FEMA's proprietary products, but we are also incorporating other data sets such as NOAA's coastal data set, the Army Corps of Engineers levee data set, USGS elevation data. We have also captured third-party data sets. And this is really the backbone of risk rating 2.0. Private sector catastrophic modeling. We've been able to go off of the third parties catastrophic modeling to determine data up to 10,000 years, which is really difficult because we don't have 10,000 years of history, right? Well, we based it off simulations. Going off of the Monte Carlo catastrophic model, we've been able to simulate flooding events and determine what areas are going to be the most impact in certain events. And while using third-party products, we've also created proprietary products such as the first floor height tool and the replacement cost value tool, which we will also get into here in detail. But what I wanted to bring your attention to here is, remember when I mentioned that in the old system, you were rated off of one of two flooding perils, either riverine or coastal storm surge. Now that is changing. We have found that a single structure can be impacted up to 6 different flood perils. We are now going to capture those 6 perils. Now, if a structure is impacted by 1, 2, or 3, then it will be rated by 1, 2, or 3 perils. Now, this is going to cause an increase in some areas, but I wanted to explain what these perils are. We have storm surge and we have inland flood riverine. Those were the ones that we had under the old system. But we've also added on Great Lakes. Now, Great Lakes are of a concern because they are big enough where we do have to take wave action into consideration. We're also adding on tsunami flood risk, coastal erosion flood risk, and the new one is inland flood fluvial, which means that we are now taking in consideration the differences in rainfall, which we always have, but what we found after Hurricane Harvey is, I believe in 2015, was that the information that was being used to determine rainfall was woefully inadequate. NOAA LS14 was a new study done by NOAA, and everyone was just flabbergasted about the findings about the amount of rainfall and how it increased over the years. So it has increased to the point where we have to capture that information at the flood risk. So now a home, if it's in the wrong location, can be impacted by all 6 perils. That will lead to a substantial increase of flood insurance. So with that being said, FEMA is still maintaining statutory requirements. So we have acted within our own scope of authority, means that we did not have to get Congress's approval or permission to make these changes. In fact, the National Flood Act of 1968 requires that we have a financially sound NFIP program. As I mentioned, the old program was no longer sustainable with the increase in severity of events. So we are following our own guidelines enacted by Congress, and we have made changes. Now, some things are not being able to be changed because they are statutory requirements, such as the increases for the premiums are capped at 18%. Congress put that in effect, so we cannot exceed that. Now, using firms for regulatory compliance. Now, I mentioned in this last class, it's really important to understand that everything we talk about today will impact flood insurance and flood insurance only. It won't have any bearing on floodplain management or floodplain compliance for communities in Louisiana. Those are remaining unchanged as of now. But BFEs and floodways, flood zones will no longer be a direct variable in how to determine flood insurance premiums. Excuse me. And that's going to be difficult for a lot of people to to get on board with. I know I did. When I first started training on this years ago, I had a really hard time of not taking a look at the flood zones in the BFE. And of course, after now I understand the process, I understand why it's not so difficult. But first starting off, it's going to be really hard. I'm not saying that these are not important. They're still very important for knowledge and for informed decisions to be made. It's just not going to impact flood insurance as it once did. And it's the same thing with letter map changes. Letter map changes are still going to be something that can be pursued, but it won't have the bearing on flood insurance as it once had. And we're going to talk more about letter map changes. And elevation certificates for compliance, especially for communities who participate in the community rating system, they are required to maintain elevation certificates. Now, communities who are not CRS still have a requirement to maintain the information found on the elevation certificate to show compliance. So a lot of them therefore just require the EC. None of that is changing, it's still being in place. So what we FEMA is maintaining certain program features to ease transition, right? So we are offering premium discounts to eligible policyholders. We are maintaining statutory discount programs such as the newly mapped pre-firm, but we are implementing new discounts such as construction and mitigation discounts, which are going to be very good tool to help homeowners lower their flood insurance costs. We're still going to allow the transfer of policy discounts to new homeowners. I'm sorry, something just changed on the screen. Can everyone still hear me?
Yes, probably just share again. Thanks, Gilbert.
I
I think somebody else may have started sharing.
All right. 1 second. Let me get back to it.
Looks good. Thank you.
All right. Okay, I'm gonna take opportunity to take a drink. So we're still allowing the transition or assignment of one policy from a current owner to a prospective buyer. This is a great way to capture that glide path. It can transfer over, so any discounts that are currently applied to that homeowner, including the glide path, which is considered discount, will transition or transfer over to the new owner. Now we are increasing the way CRS is going to save money. Now the CRS program, community rating system, is a voluntary program inside of a voluntary program. The community has agreed to enforce higher standards. In return, will be rated accordingly and be given a score, 10 being in this case, 10 being the lowest class with a 0% discount, and then you go 9, 8, 7, 6, and every time you go down, you add on 5%. So a 9 CRS class 9 will be 5%, CRS class 8 will be 10%, 7, 15%, so forth. But that's a percentage discount that's applied to every policy holder in the jurisdictional boundaries of the community who maintains their CRS certification. So that has a good way of saving money. And of course, we are maintaining group flood insurance policies, which are a policy that are often purchased for those who have greater economic disadvantages than most, and we buy a policy for them on their behalf. We are reducing the complexity, simplifying the quoting process. Right now, the only people who have access to the risk rating engine are licensed property and casualty insurance agents who write and sell flood insurance policies. It's a very simple process compared to the old 3-page application. It's a very fast process. We have tried to reduce the complexity to remove the confusion between agents and the insured. But right now we encourage people to get a quote through their P&C agents, the only ones who can do it. Now, the thing about the quotes is I encourage 3 quotes, not because you're price matching or price shopping. You're actually interviewing agents. Remember, the agent who writes your flood insurance policy is also going to be the agent who helps you through a claim process. If you have someone who is not experienced and knowledgeable about this, that can lead to very frustrating time if you have to submit a claim, which I hope you never have to do. We are eliminating the need for the elevation certificate for rating of flood insurance only, but the information still can be used from the EC to verify our own data. I'm a big believer in trust but verify. We're also increasing investment by encouraging mitigation discounts, which we're going to break down here for a little bit. And I have a series of scenarios for risk rating 2.0. I'm sorry, for the CRS. So we'll talk more about that here in a few minutes. We are leveraging more information on flood hazard and levees than ever before. I talked about those data sets that we have incorporated. Now, it's imperative to understand that the data sets have to be complete in order for us to use this. So in Louisiana, there's a lot of levees that are still under construction. Well, one of the things about the old system is the levees had to be certified by the Army Corps of Engineers to provide any reduction of flood insurance premiums. That's not going to be the case under risk rating 2.0. They just have to prove to show a level of protection, but they still have to be inside of the Army Corps of Engineers levy data set to be incorporated in our pricing methodology. So those under construction oftentimes won't be in that data set just yet. And we are reflecting prior claim for all properties in the book of business. We have a nice diagram for this, and we also add in a 20-year rolling window that are going to go coincide with the flood loss history, and we'll talk more about that. But replacement cost value, I talked about the equity in action, and we are now going to use replacement cost value, not just in those that have been insured 80% or higher for their coverage, but replacement cost value is going to be the norm for all of the buildings in our book of business. Well, because of this, we are reducing a couple of things. And one of those things was the preferred risk policy. As I mentioned before, the preferred risk policy was never based off of risk. It was based off location on a map. Well, we are now correcting that by having every policy in our book of business go off their individual risk characteristics instead of the location on a map. I think I already discussed those. The MPP is a way for lenders to do force-placed policies for those who did not buy their own, but we only had 100 of those in our book of business, and we are doing away with that just to remove the complexity. Now, submit for rates used to be for something that was unique in nature. Someone converted a plane into a home, or someone was 4 or 5 feet below the BFE. We used to have to turn to them to determine their rate, but our algorithm is so accurate, we no longer require that. Okay, so let's talk about what is changing. So the geographic variables, including the building's location, this is where we're talking about the distance to flooding source. We're talking about rivers, coast, ocean, Great Lakes. We're talking about the local relative elevation. Well, this is going to capture the differences in higher areas than lower areas. And you know, it's really big. I have a slide that will show what we are meaning by relative elevation. Elevation relative to flooding sources. The territory MSAs, the HUC 12, the drainage areas, the river classes, all these are inside of the algorithm. We really don't have a lot to discuss on the outside of them, but each one of those is going to be reflective on the rating variables. Now, the building itself is where we have a lot of input to affect change. Building replacement cost value, the construction type and method. The first floor height is a big thing. Elevation have always been important under the legacy system. It will remain so under the under risk rating 2.0. The number of floors is going to be a little bit easier to understand because moving forward to risk rating 2.0, the number of floors will only be number of floors above ground. So no longer do we have to constitute basements as the lowest floor. Our crawl space won't be counted as the lowest floor anymore. We made it easier to understand. And the mitigation discounts, elevation of machinery equipment is an easy 5% discount for elevated structures and pier palms and posts. Flood openings is another one. That's going to be 3 to 27% discount depending on the square footage of the enclosed area. And then, of course, elevating the pier palm and post itself now is going to constitute a discount. We want to encourage resiliency. This means getting structures off the ground on slab on grade foundations. So other variables, you know, the type or use of the home. Remember, we want your primary residence to be protected. So we have primary, non-primary. Primary residence will experience a glide path of 18%. Non-primary will be up to 25%. The statutory discounts, remember the pre-firm or the newly mapped, the CRS discounts. This is going to be a big thing. I think we anticipate a surge of communities who want to participate in CRS. I mean, it's an easy way to save money for constituents in those areas. And I guarantee you, a lot of these floodplain management programs are already doing the work to equate to points. It's just a question of them, you know, kind of, you know, muscling up and say, you know, I need to take on this extra work so I can help my citizens. Pre-firm status, statutory program remaining in place. Prior NFIP claims, we have a slide that we're going to break these down, but prior NFIP claims will also be a variable under risk rating 2.0. The coverages, once again, $250,000 building, $100,000 content for a residential structure. But we have this up here to remind people they don't have to stay with that coverage. If they can only afford $100,000 of coverage, $100,000 is still better than nothing. If you're relying solely on disaster assistance, you still have to have that event declared a presidential declared disaster for disaster assistance to even be available. So even some coverage under the NFIP will be better than none. Deductibles, they start at 1,250, but can be up to all the way to 10,000. Now, under risk rating 2.0, increasing the deductible won't have as big an impact on the premium as the old one did. I did see under the old system, someone increased their deductible to $10,000 to lower their premium by 30%. That's not going to be the case under risk rating 2.0. And of course, fees and surcharges have not changed, and we'll break those down one by one so you have understanding what they are. Okay, so we already talked about the FEMA source map data. We have worked really hard. There was understanding after Katrina that the methodology we're using was archaic and has to be updated. But it wasn't until about 6 years ago that actuaries determined that maybe risk rating 2.0, as they named it, was the best case to move forward. So with that, we were able to update a lot of our own map data. Our records indicate, we have a lot of records for individual assistance, public assistance, and between our NFIP claims, we prepared a lot of data sources that we use to incorporate the risk rating 2.0. But we used a lot of additional data sets, as I discussed, a lot of the other federal agencies. Now, the catastrophic modeling or the backbone of risk rating 2.0 have been paramount in how to capture what is the true risk. And for the first time, we're able to identify what is the full risk for each one of our structures in a book of business. And we will be transitioning that to the risk rating 2.0. Now, the broader range of frequencies is the Monte Carlo method we were referring to. Not only have we seen an increase in the amount of events since Hurricane Katrina, but we also saw an increase in the severity of these events. By using catastrophic modeling, we've been able to capture these risks and be able to incorporate those into our rating engine to determine the full risk where people's homes are located. Now, cost to rebuild has not been part of the legacy program, except for buildings that were insured 80% or more. And some of our residential condominium buildings will also replacement cost value. Now, that means a lot of our other structures were based on actual cash value. Now, when you're dealing with actual cash value, you have to take something into consideration, and that is called depreciation. So if you have homes that are not upkept, or you have roofs that are 20, 30 years old on these homes, when the repairs come in for flooding events, sometimes you have to subtract away the depreciation of it. So another example of that is I do a lot of conferences, and people, there's always a lot of chairs there. So when you buy these chairs brand new, they're probably $200, $250. But after years of being sat in and abused at these conferences, these events, they turn around and put them on Facebook Marketplace, 5 years later for $50. That is an example of depreciation. And that was what used to be done. But now we are transitioning to complete replacement cost value. That's going to be taken into consideration on all of our buildings in our book of business. So here's a better example for me to explain what we were talking about, the inequity in action. The $2 million home valued on the right, the $250,000 home valued, on the left, and then the $250,000 valued home on the right. Okay. Under the old system, they would have been in the same special flood hazard area. Their lowest floors would have been the same, and they would have paid the same flood insurance premium. But when you look at the footprint of the house, 1 inch of water is going to cost more to repair in the $2 million home than in the $250,000 home. So in essence, you had the lower valued home subsidizing the repairs for the higher valued home. We have finally corrected that. So now the replacement cost value in that $2 million home is going to be higher. So therefore the premium is going to be higher. Now we get asked all the time, well, if we have a $250,000 cap on coverage, why are we going to go over $250,000 on the replacement cost value? Why won't we cap it there? Well, it's the partial claims that make this up. A partial claim for that $2 million house is still going to hit or exceed the $250,000. Well, you have the $250,000 valued home, that house can be completely destroyed and hit that. But chances are the $2 million home is just going to be what's considered a partial loss. And those partial losses are what are eating our lunch every year for claims. Partial losses like this one are what drive up the claim amounts. They're getting higher and higher, and still, once again, not exceeding the substantial damage aspect of flood insurance. So hopefully this clarifies a little bit more on what we mean by equity in action. Okay. So the rating variables, the standardized rating variables that were used on the legacy system will no longer be available. What I mean by that is you used to be able to go to the old flood insurance manual. You used to be able to go to the back of it and you can find a rating schedule. Now, if you knew what you were doing, you may be able to pick the right schedule to determine an approximate cost. It won't be your exact premium, but it'd be approximate cost. Well, it was confusing as all heck. You know, you had to get the original construction date right. I said that kitty cat. You had to get the original construction date right. You had to get the years of a pre-firm right. You had to get grandfathering right. It was confusing. We won't have that anymore. It's going to be done by the risk rating engine, which is done by algorithm, and that happens at headquarters. It's a very simple process for agents, and the results are almost instantaneous. So with that being said, reminder that we are not using flood zones and BFEs in rating. So let's talk about the rating variables. We're going to break this down. Well, this is a flooding source and type of flooding, right? So under the legacy versus the new pricing methodology, we are including inland storm surge, inland flooding, storm surge, tsunami, coastal erosion, Great Lakes that are likely impact the structure. Remember before, only one of two perils were added, and then it was the greatest of the one. But in reality, we know that a structure can be impacted by more than one, and we are now going to capture that. And this is going to happen automatically by our geolocation tool. It's going to ping off the address. The home address is going to be converted to lat long, and it's going to use a geolocation tool to tell us what flood perils are going to be impacted by this structure and how much to charge. As I mentioned before, single family homes, your primary residence, it doesn't matter if it's a single family home, residential mobile home, manufactured home, multifamily purpose. This is your primary residence. You're going to have 18% glide path. All others are going to be up to 25%. So let me stop there. I got a quick quiz for you. I have tried to stress this, so hopefully we get a good response. And if I just get you to throw the answer into chat, which will no longer be considered a rating variable as part of the new pricing methodology. Absolutely. All right. Thank you for paying attention. Yes, B, flood zones and BFEs will no longer be used to rate flood insurance under risk rating 2.0. Thank you very much. All right. So let's talk about construction type. This one's kind of new for us. So under risk rating 2.0, you're going to have two construction types, three really, but frame and masonry and other. Other is going to be rated the same as frame. So let's just talk about frame and masonry. Okay. Well, frame is simply that. It's a wood frame or metal frame construction for your home. And masonry is simply that. It consists of building structures or laying individual masonry units such as brick, concrete, block, and stone. Well, we are concerned with the floor that is going to be impacted most by flooding events. And that often indicates the first floor, right? But as you see from the example, we have an elevated first floor on some type of a crawl space that is masonry product. So they're going to receive a discount for that. Now, if they would have continued that masonry product for the first floor, they would have received a discount for that as well. You know, primarily the first floor is going to be the most impacted by a flooding event. So we want the first floor to be the most protected. Now, if they went with wood frame construction after the first floor, that would have been fine. It wouldn't have had impact on their premiums. But since they decided to go with wood frame, they're receiving a discount for one, but not both. And for the first time, we are taking in consideration post pile and pier construction. You will receive a discount for having your home elevated as opposed to slab on grade foundations. And this is rightfully so. In my opinion, this has been long in the coming. We have structures elevated in areas of minimal flooding all the time, and people never really received a benefit for that, but now they will. They're going to capture this elevation project, and especially if that bottom, replace that wood with masonry product, you're going to get the most bang for the buck from your flood insurance. Now, I did talk about the 80 different diagrams and determining foundations types. Well, we're going to transition that to 6 Yes, 6 simple foundation types. Every construction method out there will be whittled down to one of these 6. And those are slab on grade foundations, oops, I moved it forward. I'm sorry. Slab on grade, we have basement non-elevated, and we have crawl space. Now, elevated, including non-elevated subgrade crawl space. You see that red arrow that indicates 5 feet. We don't want to go over 5 feet for elevations of crawl space, because there's additional weight added on to anything over 5 feet, because that area now becomes temptation to convert to living areas, TV rooms, bathrooms. So there's an additional weight with that. Now, the second set of diagrams for our elevated structures, we have elevated without enclosure and post-pile pier. We have elevated with enclosure on post-pile pier. We have elevated with enclosure, not post-pile pier. So I know it sounds really complicated right now and hard to imagine this, but every construction type out there is going to be whittled down to one of these 6. Once again, the purpose behind this is to remove the complexity of what was the old legacy system and make it easier, not just for the insurance agents to write policies, but also for the insured to understand what is going on. So under the new pricing methodology, we are considering more a ground elevation, right? Geolocation tools. So with that geolocation tool is going to convert your home address to a latitude and longitude, right? And that's going to be pinged off our geolocation tool. And that's going to answer the questions like, what is the distance to flooding source? It's going to capture the ground and surrounding elevations. And I have a slide moving up next about what is relative elevations. It's going to capture, is this protected by levee? If it is, what level of protection does this levee provide? Remember, not all levees now under risk rating 2.0 have to be certified. They just have to be demonstrated to provide a level of protection, and then that level of protection will be what is used to receive their protected by levee discount. We're going to ask questions like, is it a watershed? If it is it upstream, downstream from the watershed? Is it on a coastal barrier island where flood insurance is heavily restricted? All these questions are going to be answered automatically by the geolocation tool used when the address is converted to the latitude and longitude. So this next slide is a kind of an example of relative elevations to flooding sources. So we're going to capture this from the ground and surrounding elevation. Now, if your home is on a high elevation such as this, the premium is going to reflect this. It's going to capture the ground and surrounding elevation compared to the elevation of the water source and the lowest station grade. That is great. But we're also going to capture the same information in areas that are low lying, like this example shows. Before fluvial rain, flooding peril was not something that we took in consideration. However, moving forward, it is. So the house on top of the hill is going to receive a benefit. However, the house on the bottom of the hill, where the runoff from the rain on the top is flowing down the hill and into the low-lying area where this secondary structure is located, is going to be at a higher flooding peril for fluvial. So therefore, it's going to have a higher flood insurance premium. Rightfully so. Some things can be, choosing where you live should have a big impact on flood insurance. And the fact that this is a low-lying area right off of runoff from a hill, it should indicate that there could be potential risk of flooding. All right, first floor height is very simple. I think I kind of explained that. This is what we're asking. How high is the first floor from the ground? This one, for example, we have both. We have the first floor and the lowest station grade. So that is it. That's all we're asking. And because that's all we're asking, we're going to provide this information for a majority of our book of business, up to 80%. Now, for how we answer this question is based on 3 systems. We have one, which is the first floor height tool. We have this information for fully 80% of our book of business. So we anticipate being able to provide a large number of our policyholders the first floor height tool. Now, section 2, and I wish I had you all on mute because I want you to repeat after me. I can still see your mouths move. Repeat after me. We will not use method 2. Okay, I saw mouths move. And the reason behind this is because method 2 is based off assumptions. Now, if you look at this next slide, you'll see our assumptions are 0.25 feet. And then the highest you'll see is a 2-foot elevation for elevated without enclosure, post-piles, and pier. So what this means, if you have an insurance agent who does a policy based off of assumptions, right? And even if that assumption has drawings and plans that show that's going to be elevated of 7-9 feet, the most that assumption is going to take into consideration is 2 feet. So this is a worst case scenario. This is when no other options can be used. They don't have drawings. They don't have plans. They don't have a guesstimation of how high they want to build. Then assumptions are the way to go. But when we have the information we can input into these quotes, we need to use that. And that also means the third method can be the submittal of the elevation certificate. Well, you're saying, well, you just said it's not needed. You're right, it's not needed, but let me go into tell you what an elevation certificate is, okay? A lot of people associate elevation certificate with determining the BFE, the flood zone, and the lowest floor determine what the rate is. But elevation certificate has so much more. It has the effective date of the flood insurance panel. It has the correct suffix. It has the panel number. It has the low strength grade, high strength grade. It has location, machinery, equipment. It has detailed notes from surveyors, right? So even though elevation certificate may not be required for flood insurance, it's still a document that every homeowner should have to help them make informed decisions moving forward. With that being said, we are still going to be able to capture information from the elevation certificate and move that over for the third method of determining first floor height. I'm a big believer in trust but verify. There's nothing wrong with trusting the information FEMA is providing. Verify it with the information from the elevation certificate. If we find that the information on the EC is better and provides a more advantageous rate for the insured, then we will incorporate their data and incorporate it and provide the lower rate. But it has to be stamped and sealed. It just can't be any numbers written down on a piece of paper. It has to be a professional EC done by certified surveyor, engineer, architect that are allowed to work in that state, and stamped and sealed. All right, very simple process, number of floors, but we will no longer include basement enclosures or crawl space. That provided a lot of confusion. Well, I got an enclosure, I'm properly flood vented, but I don't have the correct number of vents, so therefore it's not rated as flood venting. The lowest floors where the ground meets the crawl space. That's not the way it's going to work anymore. Number of floors will no longer include basement enclosures or crawl space. It will be a number of floors above ground. Once again, removing the complexity of what was the old system. Very simple. 1 is 1, 2 is 2, 3+ for single family home will be 3+, all the way up to our condominium apartment complexes, which could even exceed 100+ floors. All right, so I'm going to take my time on this one. I have to forgive me for drinking so much. I did another presentation right before this. So prior claim history have always been a big impact variable on flood insurance in the league system and will remain so. As I mentioned, we decided to start everyone with a clean slate. That does not mean we are deleting or erasing prior flood losses. It just means they're being held in limbo until the first claim under risk rating 2.0. They will all come back in play. But another thing we're also implementing is a 20-year rolling period for losses to be removed. Well, we have determined that after 20 years, a loss no longer is reflective of the true ground data. So we're going to let the 20-year claim fall off the flood loss history report. Now, there is a difference between severe repetitive loss structures. Under risk rating 2.0, they are also having their premium of a prior flood loss history held in limbo. With that being said, severe repetitive loss has an 18% surcharge that's added on to every premium, right? Severe repetitive loss is flooded multiple times, over 4 times to equal the valuation of a home, or 2 times that have exceeded the valuation of the home. So they are flood prone. So this 18% will be added on the onset of risk rating 2.0. Now, if they file a claim under risk rating 2.0, that 18% surcharge will fall off. However, all the prior flood loss claims will come back into play. So that could be a substantial increase in flood insurance premiums for those. Okay. So I just mentioned about that. I do have a slide. Let me get to that here about the 20-year rolling window. Okay, so we're talking about excluded losses. Excluded losses mean increased cost of compliance, which is something that every policy has now. It's an additional fee that's collected, and it can be used up to $30,000 to help a structure that is not compliant to come in full compliance. With that being said, it's not a loss, so it's not part of the flood loss history, and neither is closed without payment. Now, closed without payment can be from the deductible, the amount of damage for a structure did not exceed the amount of the deductible, or it could be that a homeowner initiated the claim process while they're evacuating just to come home and realize there was no damage at all, so they cancel that, but we still close that without pay. But those are excluded losses as the flood loss history. So in this example, we have the 20-year rolling window. So we have 2003 policy was purchased, right? We have a claim in 2001. We have a claim in 2011, right? So we have two claims right there. The new pricing methodology went into effect in 2021. And then in 2024, we have claim number 3, right? So if you look at the prior claim factors, 3 minus 1. And then in October 1 of 2027, we have a renewal. It said number of claims is 2. Okay, well, the 2024 claim number 3, prior claim factor is 3 minus 1 because your first claim is a forgiven claim. Then in 2027, as we hit the 20-year window, the claim falls off, falling from a 2 minus 1. So you're down to 1 claim on your history. Now, the flood loss history does not start over when it changes hands. Flood loss history is a 20-year period and always stays in effect on the structure. Once again, our primary concern is the structure. Owners change hands all the time. The structure is what stays in place and needs to be protected. So another question for you, if I get you to put this in chat. When counting claims for prior claims variable, what is the rolling time frame? Absolutely, absolutely. Once again, thank you for participation in this. Yes, 20 years, and that's going to be important to remember. And you know what's coming up in 3 years? It'll be the 20-year anniversary of Katrina, so we can start expecting those claims to start falling off. Okay, so rating variables, what FEMA is providing. Okay, we're providing geographic variables based on address, once again, transition to latitude and longitude. We are providing the first floor height. We are providing replacement cost value, and we are providing NFIP claim history. Well, what can homeowners provide FEMA? Well, they can provide ground elevation. If they have a newer survey and it showed different ground elevations than what we have, we can accept that in there. First floor height tool, remember, they can submit information based from the elevation certificate that can test our data. Whatever the one is better, whatever data provides a better rate is the one we will go with. Now, if they have some type of replacement cost value, they have a document that shows that our replacement cost value is off, they can submit that documentation to test that. Now, NFIP claim history, you're probably asking, why is that on there? Well, we try to be as thorough and as mistake-free as we can, but unfortunately, sometimes we do tie claims to the wrong addresses. This happens quite a bit when communities are experiencing a lot of growth and street names are changing, or there's multiple same street names with ending in road, court, or circle, and someone just tied it to the wrong address. Well, that's what I'm here for. I'm here to try to get those untied and get that claim history resolved. New pricing methodology for fees and surcharge. If the decision makers in Washington told me, Gilbert, you can make one change, what would you do? I would remove that reserve fund assessment fee. Unfortunately, I don't have the capability to do that. That reserve fund assessment fee is an 18% fee that's added on to the overall premium to help us gather a pool to pay claims. It is something that cannot be changed, cannot be negotiated with. It's part of every policy. The HFIA surcharge is staying in place. The Homeowners Flood Insurance and Fillability Act requires a $25 surcharge for all primary residents, $250 for all others. The federal policy fee did decrease from $50 to $47, so we did save you $3 there. And probation surcharges can apply if applicable. If the community does not enforce their regulations they agreed to adopt and enforce, they can be put on probation. And that means every policyholder in the jurisdictional boundaries of that community will experience a $50 fee until that community comes off probation or they're put on suspension. All right. So this is a mock-up of what a declaration page will look like under risk rating 2.0. I'd like to pull your focus to the red arrow. We are now going to identify what is the full risk premium for the first time. I did mention HFIA earlier. HFIA required that Congress required that we increase flood insurance premiums no less than 5%, no more than 18% until they hit full risk rate. The problem with HFIA is they never identified what was the full risk rate. So in essence, those increases would have continued forever. In fact, last year, before phase one of risk rating 2.0, all PRPs increased 15%. So those increases would have continued perpetually, forever, never stopping. Now, under risk rating 2.0, we have identified what is the risk rate, the full risk rate, and it's now going to be on the declaration page. Now, in this example, the full risk rate is higher than the total annual pay amount. So how this will work is the total annual pay will experience an 18% increase until it hits the full risk premium. Now, if the total annual pay was higher than the full risk premium, then that insured would experience an immediate decrease, and that would happen immediately. There was no glide path for that. They would experience the best possible rate that they can get. So as you'll notice here, you also have an avenue for your mitigation discounts. It shows what your increased cost compliance are. And then we also show statutory discounts. In this particular case, there was $200 for pre-firm. Then you have to add on the reserve fund assessment fee. The fees and surcharges are important to remember because even though we cannot increase flood insurance premiums 18%, when you increase the premium 18%, the reserve fund assessment fee is also going to increase. So it looks like it's greater than 18%, but in reality, the premium itself has not exceeded 18%, but the fees and surcharges make it look like it does. So that's something to watch out for right there. Okay, statutory discounts. We talked about this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I want to address more about the CRS. Includes pre-firm and newly mapped programs. Those have been a big staple of the National Flood Insurance Program for a year, and they will remain. The way their discounts are supplied will be reviewed annually by FEMA headquarters, and they could be adjusted to go up or down. One of the things I like to bring to your attention to risk rating 2.0 is that I actually received a congressional inquiry on this today that a gentleman let his policy lapsed, but he thought he got it back in under time. Under the old system, we had some latitude. You know, we can go from the day the policy expired and you had a grace period of 29 days. And then even after that, we would work with you between 30 and 90 days to try to get you back in on the same policy. Under risk rating 2.0, we no longer have that latitude. If your policy expires, you have 30 days. If that 30-day window expires, that is a lapsed policy. There's no more bringing you back in under that policy. You have to come back in as a new policy. That means you have to come back in at full risk rate. No longer will there be any incremental increase, no glide path, no statutory discounts as well. So imperative more than ever to make sure you have that continuous coverage. All right, so let's talk about the CRS program. As I mentioned, it's a voluntary program inside of the voluntary program. And before, under the CRS, if you were outside of the special flood hazard area and you were a PRP, you didn't get any discount at all. Now, if you were outside of the special flood hazard area, you were not eligible for a PRP, the max you can get was a 10%. Well, this is changing under the risk rating 2.0. Well, first, let me go into a little bit more depth about the program itself. The community can be awarded a 10 all the way down to a 1, 10 being a 0% discount, a 1 being a 45. So it depends on the level of work the community provides to determine the score the community will have. Now, these scores are reviewed annually or biannually, depending on the program itself. But it is a more stringent program, and higher standards are expected and will be asked for during the recertification process. So here I have a couple of scenarios for you. If you'll look in the middle of the screen, you see the pink column. That is the legacy pricing methodology. That is the old way of doing business. And the column to the right is based off of the new pricing methodology, also known as risk rating 2.0. So in this particular scenario, we have a series of 5 structures. Structure 1 is inside of the special flood hazard area. It's current Zone A zone policy and was built in compliance. If you look under the legacy, it was eligible for the full 30% discount the community was awarded. Under risk rating 2.0, it will maintain that 30% discount. Now, structure 2 is outside of the special flood hazard area. Current flood zone, our current rating was based off of the standard X zone policy. So that means for some reason, this policy was not eligible for preferred risk policy. So the maximum they could receive under the legacy program was 10%. Now you can see once this policy hits full risk rate, they will also be eligible for the full 30% discount. Now structure 3, outside of the special flood hazard area, it's a current policy as a preferred risk policy. So as you can see under the legacy pricing methodology, the preferred risk policies were not eligible for a CRS discount. So it received none during the old system. However, under risk rating 2.0, once it's at full risk rate, it will be eligible for the full 30% discount. Now, structure 4 is inside the special flood hazard area, current as new business, okay? But I want you to pay attention to built compliance is no. So it's inside the special flood hazard area, new business. That means it did not have a policy under the legacy methodology. It's going to come in new business under risk rating 2.0. But you can see it's not eligible for the CRS discount because it was not built in compliance of floodplain regulations. So non-compliant structures will not be eligible for any percentage discounts moving forward in CRS. Now, structure 5 is pretty simple. It's outside of the special flood hazard area. New pricing methodology is new business, so they're going to come in under full risk rate right off the onset. And built-in compliance is not applicable because it's outside of the special flood hazard area. Well, as you can see, it's going to be eligible right on the offset because it's full risk rate under the CRS. So they will come in full risk rate and then enjoy their percentage discount right off the get-go. So one of the things I like about risk rating 2.0 is the increase in mitigation and construction discounts and credits. One of those discounts is going to be the machinery and equipment. Now, I know it's going to be harder for slab on grade foundations to achieve this. This is more set for new construction and those are elevated. And I'm going to talk to you why. So the machinery equipment is all or none. Okay. That means all of the machinery equipment have to be on the proper floor or there's no discount. So when you start talking about slab on grade, you start talking about having the water heater, the air conditioner, HVAC system up in the attic. That's achievable. That's possible, right? But that's only if you have a building policy only. If you start adding in content, remember if you put your house in the palm of your hand, turn it upside down, shake it, everything falls out, it's content. Well, your washer and dryer are content. They'll fall out. So in order to achieve the machinery equipment discount, they also have to be on the proper floor, which the proper floor for slab on grade, as you can tell by this visual aid, is the attic. Not very practical to put your washer and dryer up in the attic. But if you take a look at the proper floor for the rest of the foundation types, it's very achievable. For basements, the proper floor is going to be the elevated, the height of the floor above the basement or higher. Crawl space is elevated to the height of the floor above the crawl space or higher. This is where we start getting that 5% discount added in, okay? Now, 5% doesn't appear to be a whole lot, but when you start adding these on top of each other, for example, the next discount is flood venting. Now, flood venting is now going to be anywhere between 3 to 27%. Now, the full percentage discount is going to be determined by the overall square footage of the enclosed area, and this is found in the new flood insurance manual. But one of the big things about flood venting is now going to be available for the entire community. Once again, this used to only apply to structures that were inside of the special flood hazard area. So you add machine equipment 5%, you add in 3 to 27% discount here. You add on a discount for elevated pure pile and post. You add on a discount for building construction and masonry products. See, discounts start to add up. Now, I know it's going to be more beneficial for new construction when they're able to incorporate these, but this is the way we're ultimately going to save money on flood insurance. Now, I do have to mention this, that dry flood proofing is still something that is available for non-residential buildings. They do have to meet eligibility requirements such as a professional architect or professional engineer sign off on the drawings and also oversee the work to ensure compliance for the dry flood proofing. All right, so let's talk about what is going away. We talked about grandfathering going away, and I did show you the numbers. It's not as large a number of grandfather policies as a lot of people expect, but that doesn't mean grandfathering is still not beneficial. That doesn't mean that if you have a client who wants to go out and just cancel the policy, it can still be used. The grandfathering name is going away, but their starting point where that grandfather policy was is going to remain the same. That means historically grandfather policies have been lower than standard policies. So their starting point for the glide path of 18% is going to be a lot lower. That gives whoever owns that house time to make informed decisions on how to move forward. They can anticipate an increase of 18% a year until they have hit full risk rate, right? Remember, preferred risk policies are going away. And, I understand this is going to impact us severely. Almost 50% of our entire book of business are preferred risk policies, but they were never based off of risk. They were based off the location off of a flood insurance rate map and area of minimal flooding. And we have to go off of true risk when we determine flood insurance premiums moving forward. Remember the mortgage portfolio protection program? We had 100 of those in our entire book of business, so we're getting rid of those. And the SRG. Once again, our calculator has been very accurate moving forward. So what is not changing? A mandatory purchase of flood insurance. Okay. That is still going to go off of the flood insurance rate maps. The flood insurance rate maps are still going to be produced, and they are still going to be provided to communities. The communities have to adopt them. Now, these mandatory or these flood insurance rate maps are going to be used for compliance purposes. They're going to be used for regulations, not used for rating of flood insurance, but they will still be used to determine who has the obligation for mandatory purchase. Remember, if you had federal mortgage or SBA loans touching a home inside of the special flood hazard area, mandatory purchase of flood insurance is a requirement, something that has to happen. If mandatory flood insurance is not purchased by the homeowner, then lenders are required to put a forced place policy on their behalf. And I guarantee you, they're not going to look for the best deal. In fact, a lot of them will go private product, which mirrors our coverage, and they'll get a kickback from whatever company they use. But just keep that in mind. Mandatory purchase of flood insurance is not changing, still requirement. I've mentioned this a couple times, but I think you're starting to see why we repeat things is very important. Floodplain management, which comprises of community compliance, of flood insurance rate maps, are not changing. They are still in place. And remember, letter of map amendments, letter of map revisions, which are under the umbrella of letter of map change, are not changing. You can still come out of the special flood hazard area by a LOMA, by a letter of map revision based on fill. However, they won't have the impact on flood insurance they once had. Remember, we're going to go off the true individual risk assessment for every building now. But what it can be helpful for is removing structures from the special flood hazard area, therefore removing mandatory purchase requirements. And this could still be done, but once again, if ground truth changes over time, those letter of map amendments can be superseded and then rolled into the flood insurance rate map over again. So I guess what I'm trying to say there is if you have clients who have letter of map changes, remember, there's no guarantee that those are permanent. They can and they will change over time. Bigot Waters 12 and Hafaya 14 restrict premium increases to 18%. As I mentioned, Hafaya also required us to raise flood insurance premiums no less than 5%. But this is where we get the statutory requirements of 18% that we can't increase flood insurance premiums. So therefore, we are remaining within the statutory requirement, and increases will not exceed 18% unless it's your non-primary structure, and then it will receive statutory caps of up to 25%. That is not changing. Building and content limits. Okay, so we have asked legislation for years to take in consideration an increase in coverage, not just ICC, but also the statutory coverage of 250,000 building, 100,000 content. Now, my understanding, there's still legislation on the Hill being considered, but until that is passed, increased cost of compliance is still capped at up to $30,000. Now, it's important to remember that we cannot exceed the 250,000 statutory cap for coverage on a structure. So if a structure is $200,000, they are completely destroyed. and they now have to rebuild to compliance, they can apply for the ICC portion and receive up to 200 plus another 30,000 for the ICC. But if a structure is at 250,000 and completely damaged, they are already at the statutory cap, so therefore they can't apply for ICC. But once again, that is not changing for the ICC. Cost of compliant coverage is up to 30,000. The underwriting forms, by far and large, have not changed. We have the dwelling form, the general property, which is your content form, and then we have RC BAP. Now, there have been small changes to our risk rating 2.0 specific, but by far and large, they have not. The application general change endorsement forms are still being used the same way. The cancellation forms are unique to risk rating, or I'm sorry, unique to the NFIP. You just can't cancel because you want to cancel. The risk rating the National Flood Insurance Program have put guidelines in place for cancellation of policies. You have to have a justification to cancel your policy. For example, you sold the home, the new owner does not want to assign the new policy over to them. So therefore, you are justified in canceling the flood insurance policy because you no longer own the home. But you can't just cancel policy just because you don't want to pay it. You have to meet one of the cancellation guidelines to try to do that. Your flood insurance agent will be able to talk to you about what is constitute an acceptable cancellation under the NFIP and what is not. All right, so I've mentioned this several times already. Once again, we like to repeat the items that we find very important. So policies can be assigned to a new building owner. And this is important under risk rating 2.0 because any types of subsidies, any types of discounts that are applied to that premium will also go to the new owner, okay? So this happens generally at closing. And I'll tell you why it happens at closing is because both parties have to be there and agree on this. After closing, you can technically still get an assignment of a policy, but you have to bring back the people involved to get this initiated. And I know from a couple of my moves, once I sold a house, I was gone. I sold a house in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I was in Texas the next week. So getting me go back to Albuquerque or getting me to participate in something that's happening after that, it's difficult. It's really hard. So by having it happen at closing time is the best avenue. So transitions of current policies. We have already implemented both phases, but phase one started last October. It was for new business. Now between October, if you had a renewal between October and April this year, you had the option. You could have renewed under the legacy system, or you could opt into risk rating 2.0, whatever one was most advantageous for you. Well, however, now that we are in phase two, which started April 1 of this year, all of our book of business will transition to risk rating 2.0 upon the renewal. Let me stress that again, upon their renewal. A lot of people are concerned that right now they are going to change and they're going to have to pay a lot of extra money. Well, no, they have to wait till the renewal comes and they'll be rated in the algorithm based on the risk associated with the location and then the other variables such as the geolocation and the construction variables of their home to determine what their rate increase will be. However, whatever their full risk premium states, their flood insurance premium still will not increase more than 18%. This is where we're talking about the glide path. And this is why it's important not to let your policy lapse, because once you let your policy lapse, you lose this glide path. You not only have to wait the 30-day period, you also have to come back in under full risk rate. All right. I guess I just talked really, really fast during this presentation. So I'm going to open it up to a lot of questions here. But before I move over to our resources and questions and answers, this is a national perspective. Okay. Fully 23% of our 5 million book of business, of our policies in our book of business will experience an immediate decrease. We see 66% that will anticipate increase, okay? That 66% is explained by the PRPs. Remember, they were never based on full risk. They were based off the location on a firm, just a paper map. Now that we do have the capability to determine their true premium based off of risk, we can anticipate increases. Now, for a lot of these, it's going to be $0 to $10 per month, so about $120 a year. And that could be year after year after year until they hit the full risk rate. Some of them are going to experience their full risk rate and get there within 1 or 2 years. Some can carry on that increase for 10, 15 years. But we do have a couple, about 11%, that are going to experience anywhere from 10 to 20 or 20 plus greater increase a month. But what I would like to tell you is that under risk rating 2.0, there's not a single family residence that will have a flood insurance premium, that will exceed $12,125. Now, that still sounds like a lot, but you'd be totally surprised that right now, under our book of business, we have several single family residents that exceed $30,000 per year in flood insurance costs. So we are anticipating that to be helpful as well. And with the increase, we understand that we may lose policies, but it's one of those things. People have to make informed decisions that if they feel they can't afford flood insurance, they'll be relying on disaster assistance to help in the case of a flooding event happens. But we can no longer sustain the program as it was being. Artificially low flood insurance premiums in a state that has the largest number of claims in the nation. And this program is not geared towards Louisiana specifically. This is a nationwide program. So everyone in the United States is going to be rated at their full risk rate. Now, it's going to have an impact on some states greater than others, as you can imagine. New Jersey, New York, Florida, California, Washington State, all those with coasts are going to feel the impact of risk rating 2.0 more than your Colorados, your Utahs, your Wyomings, where they're in the center of the United States. There's not a big flood risk as we have along here. Now, riverine flooding is still of concern everywhere in the country, but when you start adding on other flood perils such as coastal erosion, tsunami, and coastal storm surge, the perils add up greatly.
Gilbert, we've had lots of good questions come in. Do you want me to start?
So let me finish off the resources real quick. So Risk Rating 2.0, we do have a website. It's called Risk Rating 2.0. It's Equity in Action. Now, this website has been continuously updated. Now, on there, you will also find more information on levies. Now, it doesn't go into detail on how the levy is weighted on a premium, but goes into detail to show you how the levy is counted for consideration on a level of protection. It is a technical document. It took me a while to get through it, but it's really good reading. Also on that same website, you'll scroll halfway down, you'll see a link for technical documents. Under technical documents is a premium calculation worksheet. Now, the numbers on there are notional, but it gives you a really good representation of how the risk rating 2.0 agent works and how these numbers apply to determine an overall flood insurance premium. Now, if you have information that you'd like to put on your websites, the Equity in Action fact sheet is a 6-page fact sheet. It goes over a lot of the basics of risk rating 2.0, of why we are doing this and then how we are implementing it. Remember, the why has been a big thing. A lot of people don't realize that we are over $20.5 billion in debt. And this is something FEMA does not collect enough premiums to pay off the debt and claims. We're paying millions upon millions of dollars in interest every year on a debt that we'll never be able to repay. Now, Risk Rating 2.0 is not a way for us to collect more premiums to pay off this debt. It's a way for us to collect more premiums so we can continue to pay claims, as we have a contractual obligation to do when we sign a flood insurance policy with one of our insured. So those are some really good sites. So now let's open it up to the questions and answers for the remaining time.
Thanks, Gilbert. Yeah, I've collected some here in the chat, and then also Gilbert, with some of the why as well. I know we have the directive from the White House, from our FEMA administrator. FEMA is really trying to provide products that can really help people make decisions about their flood risk. So Risk Rating 2.0 also falls in line with that, and some of the why, right? When people can truly see what the risk, the insurance risk associated with, living in a certain property or having my business in a certain property, that's also giving people information where they can make better decisions as well. So some of the questions that came in, Gilbert, a few on construction type. So a few that came in, what about stucco? What about a wood frame structure that has a cement board or stucco system? If a house is wood frame but has masonry veneer or facade, is that masonry or frame?
Nope, it has to be solid masonry product. So we're not talking veneer, we're not talking stucco. All of that is just added on to frame. And behind that stucco is a wood frame. Behind that veneer is a wood frame. So when we're talking about construction and type, we're talking about either frame or it's masonry. So it has to be a solid rock product.
And you can find a little bit greater description in the flood insurance manual. It kind of goes over what is frame, what is masonry, and what would be considered other. So you can just, search for the FEMA flood insurance manual as well. Another question, wood is something like building type, is that going to be indicated on the policy?
It may not be broken down. It will be on the declaration page as mitigation discount. And it would be easier. Everything that is filled out in the application is done with the agent and the insured. So they'll be able to answer these questions and know when on the declaration page what is referred as mitigation discount and what they put in there. Now, everything is self-reported, right? That doesn't mean that it's not checked. So if you put on that flood venting, then underwriters are going to ask for a engineered certification for the flood venting. Or if you're, anything that you put down for a discount, underwriters are going to ask for documentation to verify this. So self-reporting, but you have to back up with documentation on the back end when the underwriters are writing the policy.
Thanks, Gilbert. And I can share the example deck page so we can look at that. It looks like it's let me put it here quickly. It looks like it's listed here under property description. This example says above ground crawl space, 2 floors, frame. So I'm not sure if that's how it would be listed on all.
Yeah, if you take a look to the right where it says mitigation discounts, that's where a majority of them are going to be found. Now, some see, the thing about WYOs is they all have different interfaces. Remember the write your own agencies in which we use to write our 5 million policies. They have different interfaces. Well, the information required should be relatively the same. The way it's shown could be differently from one WIO to another. So some may break it down and what exactly constitute the mitigation discount, or some may just have a mitigation discount with the number in parentheses to show that there is a discount involved.
So other information like, replacement cost, that should be things that are on the declarations page, but some information like exactly, how close am I to a flooding source, that may not be showing up here. But those would be things that are, it's coming because of the actual like geolocation of the address. So it's kind of behind the scenes thing, but it's not necessarily listed here. But it looks like that construction type, if it was masonry, maybe it would be listed under the property description. But yeah, all right, I'm going to stop sharing there. More questions, and please feel free to keep typing more questions in the chat. Will the elevation certificate ever negatively affect a premium, Gilbert?
Now, if the information from our first floor height tool is more beneficial, we will accept that. We go off what is most beneficial for the insured. So if they submit an EC and it shows that it would be a higher flood insurance premium, we simply won't accept it. We won't use that data.
Playing devil's advocate there, Gilbert. So for the first floor height, that part completely makes sense. What about something like you mentioned for the CRS discount? If a structure is not compliant when it's constructed, it won't be eligible for that discount. So is that something that someone might be able to tell from the elevation certificate, which could then affect someone's ability to get that CRS discount?
Not really, because the elevation certificate goes off the ground truth. Okay. Now it could be non-compliant because they didn't follow a freeboard. They didn't follow higher standards from the community, which required them to be at BFE plus 1, 2, 3 feet. So the surveyor is going to go off with the ground truth. It would be up to the local floodplain administrator to determine if it's compliant or not. And if it's not compliant, not only do we have a non-compliant structure, we also have a non-compliant floodplain management program in that community, which is also a concern of us.
All right, next question. I think this question was talking about the group flood insurance policies, but please correct me if I'm wrong if you typed that earlier. What are the income guidelines or other guidelines for the group discount that that Gilbert had mentioned? And I think that was back when we were talking about the group flood insurance policy, but if you're the requester, please go ahead and type if I'm getting your question on this.
So a group flood insurance policy is purchased on behalf of the insured. There is a eligibility requirement that is overseen by individual assistants. They go off of the eligibility. It's not something that the insurance side or compliance side handles. They apply for disaster assistance, and their application shows that they are someone who needs additional assistance outside of just disaster assistance. So how it works is they subtract a certain amount of money from the disaster assistance they would receive, and they use that money to pay for a group flood insurance policy. That group flood insurance policy is good for 3 years and has recently increased in coverage. I believe it's over 70,000. Well, before it used to be a minimum of, I believe it was 30,000. So the coverage has increased significantly, but it's subtracted from the disaster assistance as well. So instead of, I think it was $300 or $600 before, now it's $1,200 subtracted from the disaster assistance. But we don't handle the eligibility. That's all done by individual assistants. So I can't explain exactly, or can't provide exactly what has to be done in order to be eligible for the GFIP. It's simply based on an application that is first submitted for disaster assistance.
Typically those, just anybody off the street, nobody can go and buy a group flood insurance policy. You can't ask your insurance agent for one. You can't buy one from FEMA. So again, like Gilbert said, you're either eligible or not after a federally declared disaster that's a flood event. And typically those group flood insurance policies are going to go to our lowest income survivors. So some of the eligibility requirements are you're in the high risk area. So zone A or zone B, you're getting that FEMA disaster assistance for a flood event for your real or your personal property. And then additionally, one of the biggest would be kind of income based. So either you weren't even referred to the SBA to get a loan to try to help with your recovery, or you were referred to the SBA for a loan and you didn't meet their requirements, maybe credit or income level. So it's definitely something you're eligible for or not, but that's something that's definitely, continuing. More questions coming in. I have a flood declaration page in front of me. It's effective May 2022, and it doesn't have any of the items that we were talking about might be on the declaration page. Gilbert, is that something where somebody could kind of maybe send you an email and get to the bottom of that?
What was it again?
They said they're looking at their declaration page effective May 2022, which I guess that would be a renewal since we're not in May yet, right? And it's saying I don't have any of those items showing on my declaration page. So it sounds like
it may not be a renewal under risk rating 2.0, or they may not have actually initiated the renewal yet. The policy date, the effective date is going to be a year. So it's going to say if you started and paid for the policy in May of 2021, you're going to have a full year before the renewal's up. So that's just the year time frame. You may not have actually received the actual renewal yet.
All right. A question related to that: how do we get a flood declarations page? When I renew a flood policy, I don't ever get anything other than the flood book for my records. Ooh, you definitely should be getting this, right, Gilbert?
Yes, I would contact my agent and ask why. You should be getting it every year. You should also get a flood loss history report with your declaration page every year.
Yeah, it should definitely be mailed to you. Even my agent emailed me a copy as well. And then I'll share the screen just one more time to look at this kind of sample declarations page because someone was asking, they were saying they don't see where it's talking about the full risk premium. So I'll just kind of make that bigger here. So for this declarations page, it's giving you some information on the left about what type of coverage they're getting, property specific information, and on the right, it's giving some information about what's going into that premium. And at the top here, we can see where it says full risk premium. This example, this is not for full coverage, which you can see over to the left there. This says the full risk premium is $591. At the bottom, and Gilbert gave a different example of this before, the total annual premium could be higher or lower. It just depends, but potentially it's because your fees and surcharges are added to this. Anything you'd like to add there, Gilbert?
I'm sorry, I'm having a little issues with my camera at that time.
Oh, that's okay. But that's the one really exciting thing was, before people would not know how high essentially their premium would rise to with rate increases that were happening every year. Now people can see, all right, my full risk premium is this. They'll also be able to see if they are getting any discounts. We talked a little bit about the community rating system discount. And we also put the link to be able to look up if your community or parish is participating in the chat there. And then more questions that came in, and please go ahead, you can still be typing in more. Is a residential home used as a rental, Gilbert? Is that considered commercial? And is that subject to a 25% increase?
Yep, it's not your primary home. Be subject to 25% increase. Your primary residence, the home in which you live, would be the one that capped at the 18%.
And is it still like a residential or commercial policy? So would that potentially still be a residential policy, but not your primary residence, or no?
So we're stepping into a confusing aspect, because when you have individual single family homes that are rented out, it can be still constituted as residential policies. But when you start talking about duplexes and large apartments, that's where we start talking about commercial entities. Because as a single family home with one landlord, it's still constitute a residential property. So it just depends on the exact location. Once we start talking about duplexes, multiple, it's no longer single family homes, then we start talking about commercial entities. But also depends too, because if you live in the duplex, it can constitute a primary residence. So there's a lot of variables on that. That's really difficult to answer without more information.
Thanks, Gilbert. Question, someone says, I'm trying to just apply everything here. If my client finds a house they like, in the past, I've looked at FEMA maps to determine the flood zone, get an idea of elevation and the flood premium. So how do I know now how to help them? I'm taking away, I can still use the maps, but if there is not an existing policy, just call an agent to get a quote. Wish there could be something that gives more about projected premiums.
Yeah, you have to contact the agents for quotes. They're the only one who have access to the calculator right now. There may be plans in the future to open them up, but they haven't talked to who would be eligible to look at the calculator. And not only that, the calculator to be opened up would be changed drastically because, you're not a licensed property and casualty insurance agent that can write flood insurance. So it is going to be restrictive to those who can right now. But that is the only way to get a quote. Now, this is when I would encourage communication with the buyer's agent. Have them provide a declaration page. I mean, they can mark out any personal information they may feel, but the declaration page, even if it's not an existing one, still give some benefit of idea of what flood insurance is going to cost. But the best avenue is to shop around for an agent and say, hey, I'm looking at this house. What would be the flood insurance based on risk rating 2.0 if my client purchased it?
Thanks, Gilbert. What would it take to make it mandatory to have flood insurance if you have a federally insured mortgage, just like you have to have hazard insurance?
It already is. If you have a mortgage that is backed by federal dollars, and that could be a mortgage or loan inside of the special flood hazard area, and almost all mortgage loans almost all conventional mortgage loans are backed by the Fed in one way or the other. mandatory purchase of flood insurance is a requirement. If you don't have it, then the lenders will put a forced place policy on your behalf.
And then still, again, the one of the uses still for the flood insurance rate maps, again, are kind of, laying out those mandatory purchase areas and showing where the locally adopted and enforced floodplain management regulations apply. Question, since we're no longer using the elevation certificate for cost, I'm assuming it will not matter how high the house floor is. Cost will be the same for home on slab and piers. Can you please clear this up?
Yeah, so that's definitely a wrong assumption. Elevation has always been important and will remain important. Now, you still have to adhere to floodplain regulations, and floodplain regulations require construction to at least BFE or higher. So there will be elevation aspect of this. The differences is between the construction types. Most of the houses have been able to, get elevation or fill in to elevate their platforms to achieve, 1, 2, 3 foot above the BFE. But now there's going to be a discount for those that choose other methods, such as pure pylon post. You can still do slab on grade foundations, but you're not going to be, it's not going to be as easy to achieve the mitigation and construction discounts, such as other methods. So no, elevation is still important, very important. In fact, if you don't elevate your home, your premiums are going to be even higher, even with the rate increase. So the fact that you still have to adhere to compliance regulations is an elevation requirement right there. And still, elevation is still very important under risk rating 2.0, just like it was under the legacy system. A lot of people are thinking that these efforts are not providing a discount. They are. The situation has changed because now more flood perils are being added on. Remember, before, your rate was only based off of 1 of 2 flood perils. That was it. So that's why we had very low flood insurance rates. But now it can be all the way up to 6. So if you don't elevate, you don't do these construction and mitigation discounts, and you're impacted by 4 to 5 flood perils, your premiums are going to be even higher than what we're seeing now. So no, elevation is still really important.
Thanks, Gilbert. And just going back to clarify there again, and someone was asking, so where is flood insurance mandatory? So again, all those A zones, any zone that starts with A, any zone that starts with B, those are going to be the mandatory purchase areas. Those are also going to be designated.
It's easier just to keep in mind that the FEMA identified special flood hazard areas, if your client's home fall inside of those, and I mean, even if just a small corner of a house is touching that special flood hazard area, it's all touching the special flood hazard area. And mandatory purchase of flood insurance applies as long as they have a federally backed mortgage or an SBA loan. Now, if they have a cash out deal, they pay cash completely. They're still in a high risk flood zone, but mandatory purchase of flood insurance doesn't apply. It'd still be very beneficial and very smart to get flood insurance.
Thanks, Gilbert. Next question. If the city is within a parish and you have CRS with different classes and discounts, which one prevails?
So every incorporated community has to join the NFIP separately. This includes parishes and all the communities inside. So simply because you're inside of a parish, let's just say, for example, a parish has a CRS rating. But if you're inside it and incorporate a community inside the parish that does not, you're not going to realize the CRS percentage discount awarded to the parish. So if your community is incorporated, they have to apply for the CRS program on their own. They have to apply for the NFIP on their own as well.
And is that something, Gilbert, you'd recommend, like, hey, they can get with the floodplain administrator, or you can, to determine, is this a structure address? Is this in the city, or is it considered parish?
Well, they can talk to their floodplain administrators, but more than likely it's going to be their CAD people who determine their tax assessors, because they have really good knowledge on what buildings are inside their jurisdictional boundaries. Therefore, they can go and tax them. They have really up-to-date products on that.
All right, next question. What if a client is looking at a house that flooded 2 years ago? It sounds like they'll have no idea what his flood insurance might be after a disaster when it floods again and he files a claim. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, I'll be honest, if it's flooded once, chances are it could flood again. I personally wouldn't want to buy a house that's flooded before without it have been mitigated. But no, if they flooded and they have an existing flood insurance policy, that can assign over to the prospective buyer, and then they'll know exactly what their flood insurance will be and anticipate the 18% increase as long as they maintain the flood insurance coverage.
All right, lots more questions coming in. Great job getting these in here. Yeah, and honestly, that question also that aligns with other types of insurance, right? Typically, the more claims, the more accidents, the more the more events that happen. A lot of times, your insurance will rise accordingly with that, right? Question: is there a co-insurance requirement for policies?
Not for the individual ones. There may be co-insurance at a larger level in the NIP, but not directly reflective off of our insured.
Another question: do you need to cover a minimum of 80% of the value of the home for your flood policy? I've been told by insurance agent they can't write for lower than 80% of value. Is that correct?
Under the old system, he was correct on one aspect. In order to receive the replacement cost value, it had to be insured over 80%, but there was not a requirement that every agent had to write over 80%. There was no requirement, as long as the agents can provide any coverage that was acceptable for the insured. But now, under risk rating 2.0, is no longer the case. Every policy in our book of business will now be rated off of replacement cost value. So we're no longer going to take depreciation into consideration. So that used to be true, but it's no longer the case.
Definitely nuanced, right? You can purchase a policy for whatever amount you want, but maybe the warning of how much could be covered or would be covered based on what percentage of coverage you had. So definitely nuances to those conversations. Are flood zones such as A or X being used at all? How should we guide or advise our clients when shopping for a home?
So yes, A zones are out there. You're going to find A zones in more rural located areas. When we do a flood map, right, it's a time consuming and expensive process. So flood maps that have detailed information are often reflected by areas where large population, large development growth. They have detailed information. Zone A's comprise the opposite, areas where we have little population, little development growth, little population growth. So the cost was not justified to provide detailed information for Zone A's, but we still see a lot of them out there. Zone X's are area of minimal flooding. Every place you look on a firm that is not color coded with a special flood hazard area is considered Zone X. Even the brown area is shaded X. Those are area of minimal flooding. But once again, mandatory purchase requirement may not be required, but still highly encouraged in these areas. 33% of our claims have been in areas of minimal flooding.
And I really love the nuance that's added to I feel like some of the problem with the past type of rating system was we would think, well, there's risk in this area, or maybe you have mandatory purchase in this area, and don't worry about these other areas because you're outside of that. And we've seen that. We see that on real estate listings even. We'll see, Zone X, no flood insurance required. And while that may be true, it's recommended. And really, as a real estate professional, not recommending it, how does that help your clients? You guys even talked about, well, I heard this information from this person. I heard this information from another person. So, as much as you can advise your clients to be covered no matter their zone, that's really a big shift with risk rating 2.0. So there's risk in all areas. So Some good things to know when you're talking to your clients about, all right, if you're going to buy in those zones A or B, those are the highest risk, the special flood hazard areas. There's known risk there. It's known that that floodwaters will rise to or exceed a certain level for the base flood. So we know this. There's also floodplain regulations they have to follow if they want to construct something new, if they want to grade the land on their property, they need to get a local floodplain permit. So you need to get permits, new construction, even making improvements on structures that are in the high risk flood area. That comes with things that your clients need to know. Now, when we're talking about Zone X, again, there's still flood risk there. They can still take mitigation actions there. You still may be close to a flooding source. Maybe you still can elevate higher. And so those are some of the things we need to start talking about when we're advising people on the properties that they want to buy and what level of risk that they're comfortable with. No matter your zone, how close am I to a flooding source? How high can I elevate off the ground? Am I using the strongest type of materials? Do I have flood vents? So those are some of the things that we want to be suggesting no matter the flood zone. Question, are owners with homes that are valued over 250,000 max, will they now be required to buy additional coverage for anything over 250,000?
No, they will not. Now, you can get additional riders if you so choose from a private product. A lot of people do this, but it's not a requirement. And you can also, if you have the next part of that question, if you have a home valued at 200,000, can you just cover it for 100,000? Yes, you can. I encourage people to get the level of coverage they can afford. Well, we would encourage to have the full coverage of the home, but $100,000 in coverage is still going to be a lot more than disaster assistance.
Thanks, Gilbert. How can I determine the full risk cost for a home that's yet to be built?
This is an easy one. The construction is going to come in as a new business. So your rate will be full risk rate right off the get-go. There will be no gradual increase for you. You'll come in at full risk rate.
So you could provide the type of information that the agent would need to get a quote, even though it's not constructed yet. Like I'm wanting the first floor height to be this far off the adjacent ground. I think it's going to have this type of foundation. I think I'm going to use these materials. I think I'm going to put it at this location address. So they could, I think it will be this much for replacement cost value. So if you could give them those type of numbers, they should be able to give you a quote, although it's not yet constructed. Is that correct, Gilbert?
Yeah, you would have to provide that based on construction drawings or plans. You can go into an office and just go off of hypotheticals, but more likely if you had the plans or drawings in front of you with the location, you're going to get more precise of a quote.
A question, should future sellers ask their insurance agents for the 2.0 policy info? And this is a great news that as everybody's coming up on renewals now, after April 1st, they should be able to see what their full risk premium is. Is that right, Gilbert? If you currently have an NFIP policy? No.
It'll be upon the renewal. Not everyone renewals in April. Everyone renewals at a different time. So the people who experience the renewal in April, if they've paid, and they can pay in advance, the bills are sent out 45 days before the renewal. So if they paid, they can get the renewal. And then, of course, when May comes around, people who are set to renew in May will send in their payment, then they'll get their renewal. So it'll go off of the months that they're set for renewal. Not everyone is going to do it all at once. It'll be upon the month that they are set to renew.
Thank you. And then question, why are some agents quoting different prices? To my understanding, the prices shouldn't be changing. So what might account for that, Gilbert?
You're absolutely right. The prices shouldn't be changing, but the quotes are only as good as the information the agents put in. So unless we can verify the agents are inputting exactly the same data, the numbers are more than likely going to be off. And we see this a lot, but we're only concerned if we're talking about major differences. But yeah, the information has to be inputted exactly the same with each agent for the quote to come back as exactly the same. But you're right. You are more, the process of the quotes is more to shop for an agent, to interview your agent, to confirm knowledge and experience more than it is to get a better rate, because they're all going to be based off our FEMA criteria.
Thanks, Gilbert. What are the flood zones, again, that will require flood insurance if you have a federally backed loan?
I'm sorry, say it again.
So again, what are the flood zones that would require flood insurance if you have a federally backed loan?
Now, so remember, it is the FEMA identified special flood hazard areas. You can go to Map Service Center, type in the address in question, and it will tell you the location. If it has a new digital firm, it has a paper firm, it can still tell you, but it'll take a little bit more work from you.
Thanks, Gilbert. Question. I'm confused. Is all of New Orleans considered to be in a special flood hazard zone?
Most of the state is. No, let's see, a lot of New Orleans and a lot of Jefferson parishes are protected by levee, which removed a lot of area from the special flood hazard area, but it is a special designation that says Zone X protected by levee. So as long as those levees stay in place, they will remain a Zone X. Now, my personal opinion is that that brings a false sense of safety in areas. Because if the levee fails, all these structures are bound to flood. So the problem is Zone X don't have a lot of regulatory requirements, so they can build slab on grade, and that's where it gets scary. But I wouldn't say all of it. You have to look on the maps and see.
Question: if a corner of a property touches a flood area, which I'll rephrase this question because all properties are in some type of flood zone or flood area. Again, it's just varying risk. So I'll rephrase that. If a corner of a property touches a high risk flood area or the special flood hazard area, but the home itself does not, are you required to still get flood insurance if you have a loan?
As long as the structure itself is not touching the special flood hazard area, no. Now, keep in mind, lenders have the capability to require flood insurance regardless if you're in or out of the special flood hazard area, but vast majority of them don't apply this. So as long as the structure is not touching the special flood hazard area, and let's say the yard is, but the structure is not, that's not an eligible candidate for a mandatory purchase of flood insurance.
So if someone wants to kind of, contest this with their lender, they could talk to the floodplain administrator, if the floodplain administrator will provide them maybe a format, a little map showing that their structure itself is outside of this area. There's other things that they could do to get like an official flood zone determination. Question, what will happen with existing houses that are now below the base flood elevation?
Well, remember, compliance is not changing. So if they're below the BFE right now, more than likely they're pre-firm. So if they're damaged to what's called substantial damage, or if they do a substantial improvement, which either one of them, if they exceed 50% of fair market value, they'll be required to be brought in compliance. So this aspect for insurance is not changing. The compliance part still, the aspect for insurance is changing not for compliance. So you have a non-compliant structure below BFE. Now, if it's not pre-firm and it's still below BFE, that's a non-compliant structure as it is. So the community should be working with the homeowner to mitigate that home.
In Baton Rouge, 2016, thousands of homes flooding, and lots of homes were not in the special flood hazard area, had not flooded before. How will risk rating 2.0 impact those properties?
We're going off of full flood risk. As I said, you said a lot of them were outside of the special flood hazard area. Those were the homes that enjoyed the preferred risk policy. And remember, the preferred risk policies were not based off of risk. They were based simply because of the location on a flood insurance rate map that had them outside of FEMA identified special flood hazard areas. So now that we know and we have the capability, every building, regardless of their flood zones, are going to be based off their full risk. So those areas, it's hard to say without knowing the variables involved, but if they fall into the variables being used, such as distance to flooding source, the construction type method, and the new flood perils, it could have a impact on them to increase flood insurance premiums. That being said, if they're higher ground surrounding elevations, it could lower. It's just one of those questions really hard to answer.
Thanks, Gilbert. Again, question, what was required if you're going to have your lot graded? So again, that's something, when we say we're not using the maps directly for maybe the rate of your insurance anymore, the maps are still used for things like floodplain management regulations. And we talk more about this in the general NFIP course. We're repeating that on the morning of the 21st, if you didn't take it this morning. But all development in those high risk flood areas, those zones A and B, they require floodplain development permits. So if you're building a new house, a new structure, if you're improving a structure, if you're even just grading or filling, you should be getting a floodplain development permit. And that's not from FEMA, it's from your local floodplain administrator. They might be in your building or permitting office. Question, what you can afford in flood insurance work for banks or mortgage lenders that want full coverage?
So the lenders have the option. If you have a mortgage, lenders will require either the value of the home or the amount of the loan. And that is the amount of coverage you have to have. Now, if you own the home outright, then you can select the amount of coverage you would like to have.
Question, my policy renews in August. Can I see that full risk rate right now?
No, the full risk rate is not on the quotes. It's only on the declaration page. So you have to wait to your renewal, and then in the new declaration page, you'll see what your full risk rate is.
You can also try to call your insurance agent and say, please, please, can you give me an idea?
I don't know if agents have access to the full risk rate. That was one of the things I wish I could change, is that we didn't put a requirement on what information has to be on a quote. We put requirements on our WYOs and what information has to be on the declaration page. But because of that, quotes are all over the place. Some are very detail orientated. However, most are not. They have very little information on the quote. And I dislike that very much, but that's something that I'm just not capable of changing. I expressed my concerns to headquarters, let's just say, a number of times.
A few more questions and we're right about time. From a participant question, if I have vacant land I'm going to build, if I build a raised house instead of a slab, will that potentially help my flood insurance be cheaper?
Yes, especially if you build a raised house on masonry product. Now, if you build a raised house with masonry product and the first floor is masonry product, even more of a discount. Now you're going to be eligible for the machinery and equipment. You're also going to have a raised house, so you're going to be eligible for the flood venting discount as well. You see how these are starting to add up? I know this is incentivizing new construction. It's not going to have impact of a lot of existing inventory, but this is where we want it. Not only is your home going to be more resilient, but if flood ever does get into your home, your first floor is made out of rock. You scrub it out, you disinfect it, you're good to go. Get back in there. But if it's wood, that's where a lot of the damage comes into play, because everyone who's flooded with wood understands that it's not a simple process to repair. You have to clean everything out. You have to take on all the drywall, all the insulation. You have to remove all electrical components, elevate them up. Then you have to treat the wood with cleaner. Then you have to let the wood dry. Then you have to test the wood again to make sure it's completely dry. Treat it for mold, and then you can start the repair. All that takes a lot of time. With masonry products, wow, you just muck it out, disinfect everything, put back everything where it goes, and you're good to go. So yes, a lot better of a price.
Thanks. Teresa, if you could put the contact information for Gilbert and myself and your contact info in the chat here, that would be awesome. If you guys have follow-up questions, and if you did not attend the basic NFIP course, definitely try to attend it, because we gave a lot more context to a lot of these different pieces. I'll put a final question to you, Gilbert, and then we'll throw it to Angela to finish up here. Last question. I have a home that was converted to a single family home, but was once a double. The flood deck page still has the home listed as a 4-family home. If I contact my agent to make the change, will my rate change because the policy renewed on 3/3/22?
Yeah, I don't have enough information to answer that question. I have to answer that one offline. We'll have to talk about that. With that being said, let me finish with one question. So Lisa said, what is your advice for agents who are working with buyers who are looking for land who plan to build? My clients are concerned of future costs of course, and that is understandable. And this is something I applaud. One of the things that have the biggest impact on flood insurance premium is the location. Now, I know the desirable locations are close to water, right? But those are often the areas of high flood risk. If you have clients and they have the capability to go more inland to find these areas of relative elevation that are higher than the surrounding areas, those are the locations where they're going to receive the maximum benefit under risk rating 2.0. Then if they incorporate the construction and mitigation discounts into their drawings, their plans for the new home, then they're going to realize the entire aspect of risk rating 2.0, which is to incentivize mitigation and construction. All of those discounts will come into play. And then also, if you can get the local community to participate in CRS, that's an additional discount on top of all the other discounts. So that is my advice, is to really talk to your clients about areas that will affect the long term of where they live. I know, I love visiting Louisiana. I love driving through the area. I love seeing all the camps on the lakes and the rivers, and but those are the areas that are going to have the higher flood insurance cost. And the risk rating 2.0, they're going to increase until they have full risk rate. So that's just something to keep in mind. But thank you very much.
All right, guys, we're gonna pass it back to Angela to wrap up. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We will be sending out CE certificates by April the 22nd. If y'all have any questions or need anything further, again, we have resources on the Realtor page on our website. And you can also feel free to email me at angela@larealtors.org or give me a call direct at 225-224-0711. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, guys.